Hey there, it's Gary Parrish. Welcome back to the CBS Sports Eye on College Basketball podcast, where we sometimes discuss camel fighting, dodo birds, leaky back, Carlos Correa. Matt Norlander is here with me. If you're watching us on YouTube, smash the like button like you're Brandon Davis. You have consent. If you haven't yet subscribed to the YouTube channel, knock that out while you're here. Let's get into it. We are in the days leading up to the Christmas holiday, and it seemed like we were headed for a pretty uneventful week. Only one game all week on the schedule between two teams that are currently ranked in the AP poll. On a surface level, looked boring. But then Tuesday somehow was anything but boring. Four ranked favorites lost to lower ranked or unranked underdogs. Here's the list. Number 6, Virginia, lost at number 22, Miami, 66-64. Number 14, Duke, lost at unranked Wake Forest, 81-70. Number 15, Mississippi State, lost to unranked Drake inside Pinnacle Bank, 58-52. Number 24, Marquette, lost at unranked Providence, 103-98 in double overtime on CBS Sports Network. Deadleg, what's the biggest surprise from that group of upsets for you?
The biggest surprise of them all? I think State losing was actually the biggest surprise. Agreed? The way it happened, or with the SEC having a pretty terrible Tuesday, maybe that just keeps in line with the pattern that we saw developed across the conference. Just bad losses for teams outside of Mississippi State, which hadn't lost at this point, but Ole Miss taking its loss. I don't know. It was a rough one. North Alabama taking out Ole Miss, I thought was not good for Kermit Davis. I guess I would register. I mean, Drake's a solid team, not a total stunner, but the way that Mississippi State had been playing, I don't know. I wasn't surprised at Miami. Like, I thought Miami had a good chance at winning. I was surprised that Georgetown gave UConn a real good run. Maybe that's actually the biggest one.
That is like that's the biggest surprise of Tuesday, is that UConn was down at home to a really bad Georgetown team with like 12 minutes to go. But UConn, of course, rallied and ended up winning the game by 11. So the Huskies are still 13-0 with 13 double-digit victories. But it got a little more stressful than it should have been on Tuesday night.
It did, and then they had some sort of 15-2, 17-2 run, so it wound up going all right overall there. But yeah, I don't know. Like, if I could just focus on the SEC real quick here, like, we don't need to make a huge deal about Mississippi State losing, but the fact that it did lose, and then it's really been a little bit of a tough stretch going back Sunday. Auburn lost against USC. We talked about Kentucky's issues overall. And for the conference, which I think will be fine, just not good. Florida was handily defeated against Oklahoma. Nada was at that game in the Jordan Brand Classic, and then we'll talk about the other half of that in a little bit because there's a nice one coming up tonight. And then Texas A&M losing at home to Wofford. Just, I don't know, one on top of the other, a couple quad 4 losses in there too. And so while the SEC at the top of it will be fine, it's just been a rough, even more than 24 hours, although it was rough on Tuesday with all these teams losing. It's been a rough 72 hours or so for the league. So I think that was my largest takeaway overall of the past couple of days there. But obviously we got to get to what happened in the ACC with Virginia and Duke. What about you? What are your biggest impressions?
The most surprising result for me was, Mississippi State losing a neutral court game to Drake, which is, of course, as listeners of the On College Basketball podcast know, is the first university ever named after a hip hop star.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, but Mississippi State was only a 5.5 point favorite in that game. Duke was actually a 7-point favorite at Wake Forest. So relative to the point spread, the biggest surprise of those 4 teams losing, Marquette, Virginia, Mississippi State, and Duke, the biggest surprise was Duke, although it should be noted, Duke was without 2 of its 5-star freshmen.
Did the line reflect that is my question. Because I wonder if that line drops to, say, 4.5 or 5 right before.
The last number I saw was Duke at -7. I guess it's possible it came down at tip off, but I doubt it went. I doubt it got below the 5.5. If it moved at all, I doubt it got below the 5.5 that Mississippi State was favored by. So, Duke losing relative to the point spreads was the biggest surprise. But Wake Forest has won at Wisconsin, and you're in a true road environment against an ACC in-state rival. So, it is what it is. On that note, I will say I saw this graphic pop up last night. Duke is now 10-3. 10-3. I got a trivia time for you. Trivia time. When was the last time the Blue Devils lost 3 games before New Year's?
I wonder if this is a trick question. Was it not 2021, man? Because that was a terrible year for Duke.
God, I hope not. I took a picture of this graphic with my phone, so if I can prove to you, it was
a shortened year. Hold on. Remember they bailed on a couple of non-conference games. Hold on.
Yeah, they quit. They said, you know what, we're done playing. Yeah.
And because of that, you are correct. This is not at least as far as I can tell, because I did just bring up 21. Duke played. Frame the question again.
When was the last time the Blue Devils lost 3 games before New Year's?
Okay, so in 2021, the Duke Blue Devils played a grand total in the 2021 season. Grand total. Trivia time. How many games do you think they played before New Year's?
I'm looking at it now. 5.
They played 5 games. They went 3-2. So that's why. So that's okay. So with that out of the way, GP, I'm going to say that is such a fascinating question that you're dropping on me, because I feel like it had to have happened this century. I'll say they famously were a trendy and rightful upset victim pick in 2007 when they lost to VCU. I'll say the 2006-2007 season was the last time that happened.
The correct answer, far as I know, according to something I saw on TV last night and took a picture of, the correct answer is the 1982 83 season. 82-83 is the last time Duke lost 3 games before New Year's. This was Coach K's 3rd season at Duke, and the Blue Devils finished that season 11-17 overall, 3-11 in the ACC. After that season, Mike Krzyzewski was 38-47 overall at Duke, 13-29 in the ACC through 3 years. That's hot seat stuff. And then, of course, he made 11 straight NCAA tournaments, 6 of the next 9 Final Fours, which is ridiculous.
It is. That's
6 of the next 9 Final Fours. He won 2 of the next 9 national championships. The rest, as they say, is history. But to go from being 38-47 overall in your first 3 years at Duke to making 6 of the next 9 Final Fours is like that's got to be the biggest turn in the history of college basketball.
It took longer for Scott Drew. It was a slow boil with Baylor, but from what Baylor was to win a national title. But that doesn't.
Yeah, I don't mean like you take a bad thing and make it into something great, like Scott did at Baylor or John Calipari did at UMass. I mean, like, you're about to get fired. Never mind, you're going to make 6 of the next 9 Final Fours. How about that? You go to Mike Krzyzewski on that day and you say, listen, Mike, you just wrapped up your 3rd season at Duke. You're 38-47 overall, 13-29 in the ACC. This is clearly not going well, but I got good news. You're going to make 6 of the next 9 Final Fours. What? I mean, even Mike Krzyzewski would have been like, this is where you're supposed to do your Mike Krzyzewski impersonation.
I love Duke. I love it. I love this program. Man, that is one hell of a stat, though. Now, we'll note, yes, they didn't have Whitehead and Lively, non-COVID illness as it was described. Duke now has 11 days off. Will play Florida State on New Year's Eve. The loss is understandable. Kansas by 5, Champions Classic. Drilled by Purdue in the PK 85. And yeah, I mentioned on the pod when that happened, but just kind of walking and talking with Shire from the locker room out to the team bus, and he looked like he encountered just a dominating machine there in the Boilermakers. And then at Wake Forest. Now, Wake Forest, we'll see what they become. Steve Forbes is a hell of a coach, and he didn't anticipate a rebuild like this. We mentioned this in our ACC preview. He did not think he was losing Jake LaRavia to the first round of the NBA. Are you kidding me? From Indiana State? Didn't anticipate that. Thought he'd have him back. Now, Alondas Williams was an older player, was the ACC Player of the Year. Wasn't stunned to lose him, but yeah, like a little bit more of a rebuild here. And, we don't need to go waist deep on Wake right now, but a nice win to get to 9-4. Wake's lost to Loyola Marymount, Clemson, LSU, and Rutgers. It has that road win against Wisconsin. So who knows? If Wake actually gets it together and Forbes winds up getting this team into, the 5th or 6th spot in the ACC, maybe we wind up talking about the Deacs as we get toward the end of February as being a potential bubble team. This was a good one. You get it on your home floor, and you're able to really take Jeremy Roach out of his game. Kyle Filipowski, I think they both had 9 points apiece there. So a good win for Wake. We'll see what happens. They've got another chance. If we want to take them seriously, how about this? We'll talk about Wake again. They got Virginia Tech at home on New Year's Eve, and then they're at North Carolina and at Louisville. You get out of that 2-1, then you might have a stew. You might have a stew cooking there. With Duke, you take the loss, and we'll see how they respond. Their next games are, again, FSU New Year's Eve, NC State on January 4th, and then BC on January 7th there, and then they're home against Pitt. So I would anticipate at minimum, Duke to go 3-1 in that stretch as they curl toward the new year here. But as I said this on HQ, I didn't hit Wednesday morning. We really might just need the entire season to evaluate Duke. Like, I didn't have them top 10 in the preseason. I was skeptical this would be a top 10 outfit, but I had them like 15 or 16 overall, and that just might be what they be. They might float between this team that's, ranked 12 or 13 and down into the 20s. If they dropped out of the poll altogether at some point, wouldn't be surprising there. It's Shire's first year. Really young team. Hasn't had a whole lot of health luck overall as well, and so they're going to get through it. I think they'll make the tournament. They'll make it with room to spare, but this might well, because the ACC is also not going to provide overwhelming quad one opportunities. It will have some, but they're not going to be rolling game after game after game, which could actually benefit a team this young. We're probably going to be looking at a Duke team that's had its worst seed since, I'm going to go back to what I answered with the trivia time, GP. The last time Duke wasn't a 1, 2, 3, or 4 was back in 2007. It was that 6th seed when it got knocked off by the 11th seed VCU Rams. You don't want to go to war. Don't be starting nothing. Won't be nothing there with the Peppas, which I actually think you can see right behind me there. I got my own Peppas jersey, by the way. Shouts. So I think Duke is probably headed toward that kind of season. It could salvage it. You told me they wind up on the 3 or 4 line, I'd believe it. But I think the more likely thing is that Duke, might just work its way to 4 or 5 seed status when we get to March.
Yeah, just to clarify, this will be Duke's worst seed in theory. Could be since then, but Duke did miss the NCAA tournament in 2021. Did I have Duke too high in the preseason? It seems pretty obvious that I did. I had them top 6 or 7, and they don't appear to be that right now. Like we've talked about before, a lot of the belief in Duke was tied to the idea that they were enrolling, 3 of the best 4 freshmen in the country. And the truth is, Filipowski's been good, really good, but Lively has not performed at the level that was expected. Whitehead hasn't performed at the level that was expected, and neither Lively nor Whitehead were available at Wake Forest. And Filipowski, he was 4 of 14 from the field. So take everything you thought about Duke 2 months ago, and then imagine somebody telling you on December 20th, of those 3, elite level high school prospects that have made you think Duke's going to be really good against Wake Forest on December 20th, 2 of them aren't going to play, and the other one's going to miss 10 of the 14 shots he takes. Well, then that's probably a loss. So I'm with you. I think it's pretty clear at this point, Duke is not going to be what some of the preseason. I shouldn't say that. There's some evidence to suggest Duke probably isn't going to be what some of the preseason expectations suggested, but I still think this can be one of the 25 or so best teams in the country. I still have the Blue Devils in the top 20 at number 20 in the top 25 and 1. But I will say, if you're a first-year coach replacing a legend, you never want those graphics popping up on the television, regardless of the circumstances.
Regardless, since 1983,
you don't want that. It's just bad business. Regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the context, because you can argue it away by saying, "Well, yeah, sure, but the schedule's been harder than most of Duke's schedules were throughout." The Coach K reign. I don't know if that's true or not, but you could say it and point to some stuff, I'm certain. And then we had injuries in the preseason. 2 of my top, 3 freshmen didn't even play in that one game. There's a lot of stuff you can point to explain it away, but still you don't want those graphics popping up on television when you're a first-year coach replacing a legend. This is Duke's worst start since the 1982-83 season. More specifically, the first time Duke's lost 3 games before New Year's since the 82-83 season. Cal Neptune dealing with the same thing, right? When Villanova started 2-5, there was a lot of these graphics popping up. Like, this is the worst start for Villanova since blah, 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 blah. Now, again, you could point to some stuff. Cam Whitmore's not playing, so of course we're losing. And now Cam Whitmore's back, and we're 4-0. But when you're a first-year coach replacing a legend like John is with Mike or with Kyle is with Jay Wright, your hope is that you get through your first year without this kind of stuff popping up, these bullet points. And for those 2 guys, at least, it's the bullet points have popped up.
Let's stick in the ACC because Miami, Virginia, Miami held control of that game for most of it. Now they almost fumbled it away into overtime, but they dodged it, and Reese Beekman couldn't gather himself and get a shot off on the ultimate play of the game there. Virginia loses back-to-back games, both respectable games. Both will be among the highest level quad 1 losses they'll have, and any team will have, home against Houston and then at Miami. UVA is 8-2. And I also talked about them on HQ on Wednesday morning. And we're probably not going to have more on the Wahoos to discuss until mid-January. Their next notable game is going to be home against UNC on January 10. So they're 8-2. I think Virginia fans probably would have taken that going in. Now, they didn't know they're going to wind up losing that one, not losing, but having the Northern Iowa game taken off the schedule. So they had a 10-game non-conference schedule as opposed to 11. We've mentioned that a couple times previously due to the tragedy there with the football program. But if you would have told UVA fans you're going to get a non-con play with just 2 losses, I think you would have taken that even with the top 15 hype going into the season. Miami's the bigger story here right now. Made the Elite 8 last season, obviously. Larinaga done a wonderful job there. And after kind of quietly getting there from the 10 line, right? Like, I saw him in person. I was in Greenville, South Carolina when they beat USC, and then just I think we talked. If I didn't talk with you on the pod, that might have been the episode you were off. I might have been talking with Boone or Cobb, but like, they just like eradicated Jabari Smith's college career. It's always fascinating to me when you have like these star players and then they get into the tournament, they fail to make the Sweet 16, and they just they leave without any hint of any kind of glory. That's what Miami did to Auburn and Jabari Smith last March. And then obviously they went against Iowa State before getting handled by Kansas in the Sweet 16. But going back into the season, the noise early was the Nigel Pack stuff, and then the Isaiah Wong, won't he transfer because of all this stuff. And we look up here. I've had the Canes in my power rankings every week since they always go live for the first time. Like to get a little bit of sample size, and the first edition always goes up after Christmas. After Thanksgiving. They've been in it each week. I think I got to put them top 10 this week, JP, because at 12-1, neutral court loss against Maryland, the way they are winning, the offense looks amazing. Wong probably has to be considered an All-American at this point. First, second, third team, wherever you want to put him. Overall, he's been outstanding. Nigel Pack has not been the guy that they've hoped he would be, and maybe he will grow into that. Like, he was a quality shooter coming out of K-State. He's been a spotty but helpful role player. Norchad Omier has been way more impactful, way bigger player, the bigger transfer after coming from Arkansas State, where he was the best player in the Sun Belt last season. Larry Nagas, they've got something here, and at this point, when you look at the ACC, not just the standings, Miami's the only one that's played 3 games at this point. They're 3-0, so they lead the top of the ledger there. Although shouts to Pitt, by the way, 2-0. You'll take any kind of victories you can get at any point. So at least credit Pitt at this point, even though the schedule will obviously probably break the other way for them. Miami has to be considered, I think, the ACC favorite at this stage. The other team that you'd have in that conversation, obviously Duke is Duke. Virginia, UNC, that might be it at this stage, right, GP? So, and Miami's as good as any of them right now. I would consider them, and we're just early. So this is no huge declaration. I just want to give listeners, a status update. Right now, it's fair to say, with all we've seen, everything through it, 12-1, Miami is your ACC favorite heading into 2023.
I would disagree with that.
Okay.
I would still make Virginia my favorite, and I believe Virginia remains my highest ranked ACC school. That's true. I have Virginia, dropped them, obviously, but Virginia is
these teams will not play again this season in the regular season, just so you know. That was their one and only meeting, and Miami won it. So they got a little benefit by getting it on their home court.
For sure. Virginia, I now have 10th in the top 25 and 1. Miami, I have 14th. Duke, I have 20th. Virginia Tech, 23rd. North Carolina, 24th. So those are the ACC schools in the top 25 and 1. And obviously, massive win for Miami, but I still think over the course of an entire ACC schedule, at this point, I'm going to trust Virginia to barely edge Miami and everybody else in the ACC standings. If I had to pick a team right now to win the ACC, even after last night's loss, I would still pick Virginia.
If you made me pick as well, I would lean UVA. Miami's going to have a good shot, but they do have the roadies. They do have at Duke. They do have at Virginia Tech, and they do have at North Carolina. So there's some tricky ones in there overall, but a nice little go of it. And Isaiah Wong was in our top 25, I think, 101 players. He wasn't a preseason All-American for us, but he is certainly tracking toward that status right now. I noticed in our Google Doc, GP, unless you've got any other thoughts on this one, you also mentioned Marquette, because Marquette Providence, CBS Sports Network game. It's awesome, dude. Double overtime. Providence has a way of getting into these multiple overtime games. And as of late, you know, pulling off a win. Like the UConn Georgetown stuff, that was noisy. Like my wife asked last night, she's like, how busy is the night? I was like, well, there's a couple games, but I don't think it actually will be too crazy. Because we're still working through White Lotus, no spoilers and all that stuff. We did not wind up getting to.
I can tell you exactly what happened.
No. So we did not.
I can tell you everything about it.
That's enough. I knew I shouldn't have even mentioned it. So, so then, she went to UConn, but she doesn't like college basketball. And so I was like, your Huskies, man, they're in it right now. And she's like, oh yeah, Georgetown, they're good. I was like, well, they aren't supposed to be rolling at this kind of level right now. My youngest brother, was actually at the game. He got tickets on a whim last minute. It was like, I might as well go and watch UConn win by 30. And then lo and behold, he's texting me. He's like, is Georgetown going to win this thing? So that was compelling, but the Providence game was way more so. And Marquette had a good opportunity here to get to 10-3. It's ranked right now, I think 24th in the AP rankings, and just re-solidify its bona fides there. Marquette's still solid. They're still performing better than I predicted that they would to this point. There isn't a bad loss on the resume yet. At Purdue, neutral Mississippi State, home against Wisconsin, which Marquette wants back desperately. That was an OT loss, and then a double OT loss against Providence. So there's no bad L right now. Those are all Q1 defeats, but I thought it was real big for Providence at 10-3 to get this one. Now 2-0 in the Big East, open up with a road win over the weekend at Seton Hall in league play, and they'll be off for 9 days. But Bryce Hopkins for 29 and 23 in this game. And it is like, I did notice some of the chatter on Twitter with all this stuff. Like Croswell's been a good player that's returned. I actually thought Jared Bynum would be a lot better than he's been. He has not been. He has not been a top 2 or 3 player on this roster here. Devin Carter, South Carolina transfer, has been very good. And then Bryce Hopkins has been a top 10 player among all Big East programs to this point. And the fact that Kentucky is a little bit lost right now, I'm not saying if Hopkins was still on the roster, we'd be talking about a Kentucky team with 1 loss or anything like that. I'm not necessarily saying that, but he was not utilized a ton last season, could barely get on the floor. He transfers. This could very well be, like, I know for Kentucky fans that couldn't help but notice what he did in this game and really carrying Providence to a win. I get all that. There's no telling that if he was still there, that he wouldn't still be in something of a bit of a role player. Like, this might be a case where a guy really did need a change of scenery, a different scheme, a different coach, and there's just something about the alchemy with how he's made as a player and how Ed Cooley runs the program and how he runs their stuff, that it's all working. And right now it is absolutely working for Hopkins and for Providence. He's at like 17. He's at almost 18 points, more than 9 boards a game, almost 3 assists a game. He's been one of the surprise transfers in the entire country, and that's a big win for Providence to get to 10-3 and increase their chances. I don't know if they're going to be a tournament team or not, but that's the kind of win where you almost need it when you're looking back if you're going to wind up being a bubble team. Good on Ed Cooley's Friars.
They're like Bryce Hopkins scored 29 last night against a ranked team, and Kentucky scored 53 the other day against a ranked team. And so if you're a Kentucky fan, that I don't want to pretend to know exactly how a Kentucky fan could feel about anything, but I would assume you'd look at that and go, oh man, really? because there is a history of this type of thing happening. The latest version is Bryce Hopkins, but before that it was Johnny Juzang, and before that it was Kyle Wiltshire, like guys who can't get on the court at Kentucky for whatever reason, and then they go to these other places and they're amazing. And And that certainly seems to be the case with Bryce Hopkins right now. There was a funny moment. I don't know if you saw it at the end of toward the end of Marquette Providence. It was on CBS Sports Network. The Tom McCarthy and Steve Lapis were on the call. I just worked with them on Saturday at Villanova St. Joe's, and at the buzzer of the first OT, Devin Carter like really blew a layup. I mean, it was like if you take I'm not trying to be goofy, but it was like, you ever take a 12-year-old basketball player who's right-handed and say, all right, now go make a left-handed layup, and they just throw it off the back. It's just all awkward and weird. That's what it looked like. He just threw it off the backboard and it went in, and so he missed it. It's like, we're headed to double overtime. And then, of course, like we always do, you go back and show the slow motion replay, and it sort of emphasizes exactly how badly he missed it. I could just hear it. You got to know Lap to like truly enjoy this moment, but you could just hear it in his Lap's voice how disgusted he was with that. He was like, he had a layup. and then they show it again, and Tom McCarthy's like, and Devin Carter could not find the nylon. And we're going to break. They're like seconds away from break, and Lap's like, the nylon? Couldn't find the rim. Couldn't find anything. And I was like, poor guy. I hope I don't really have any hope, but like, you don't want to blow a layup like that and then your team lose. So fortunately for Devin Carter, fortunately for Providence, they did pull away a little bit in overtime and win that thing 103-98. So I did drop Marquette out of the top 25 and 1. I moved Maryland back in, and I hate moving Maryland back in on a 3-game losing streak after losing by 27, because like somebody's going to see that and go, they just lost. Of course I know they just lost, but like I've explained many times, I keep a running list of teams, and Maryland's like 27. The entire resume, if you cannot focus too much on the last 3 games, but like focus on the entire resume, like forget when the games were played, just like let's look at this body of work. Maryland still is very reasonably ranked, and I moved the Terrapins back into the top 25 and 1 to replace the Marquette team that I had to get out of there.
And we are we're really hitting a slow stretch here. We'll preview the night games in just a minute here, but a few good games this week before we get into some downtime over the Christmas break before stuff picks up again next week.
Yeah, we'll look ahead to what's interesting on Wednesday night and Thursday night in a second. But next, Norlander had a nice piece on UMass coach Frank Martin that posted earlier today. We're going to spend some time on that next. First, though, a word from our partners.
Huddle up, NFL fans. It's almost Nickmas.
Merry Nickmas. Nickelodeon and the NFL are teaming up
for the ultimate holiday gift.
The Nickelodeon NFL Nickmas game.
I got 3 words for you. Broncos, Rams, and Santa.
Ho, ho, ho. This is going to be the best Christmas ever.
It's the Denver Broncos taking on the Los Angeles Rams in the Nickelodeon NFL Nickmas game. Christmas Day at 4:30 Eastern, 1:30 Pacific. Only on Nickelodeon.
So Norlander had a nice piece on UMass coach Frank Martin this morning about life as a coach, about a lot of things, but among those things, life as a coach with a family, changing jobs, and the complexities of that. It's your story. I'll let you take it from there.
Okay, well, thanks, GP. Yeah, we should spend a couple minutes on this because I think, frankly, Frank and his wife Anya would want us to even more. So, story behind the story is this: I saw Frank at a recruiting event in Connecticut, here in Connecticut, over the summer, and he's a few months into the job, and was just talking to him, how we doing, how's life, how's the family, and this Frank Martin is a different kind of coach. If he's got something on his mind, he'll tell it to you, and I so appreciate him for that. And so when we were talking, that's when he indicated to me, he's like, Matt, it's not as easy as everyone thinks it is. And he's a few months into a career reboot, and I thought, well, that's interesting. So he shared a few things, and in that moment we were more kind of speaking informally and casually, but he shared a few anecdotes that didn't even wind up making the story, that just kind of stuck out to me. So then I saw him again on the trail in July, and then we linked up, and I was like, can I come up and see the team and check it out? And then I went up there with the intention of probably writing about, a new start, nothing like too crazy, too big, but I did ask, I was like, listen, I called him first. I remember being at my my younger son's. He was getting ice skating lessons, or he called me or something like that. And so he had mentioned this again, just kind of the stuff like you know, it's not so easy going through these kind of changes. And I was like, Frank, you know, you've brought this up a couple of times. Like, would you be interested in like talking on the record about it so I can write a story about it? But if you're not, like, it's completely fine. Because as you well know, Parrish, in fact, before I continue, I'll just toss this back to you. Like, there are just occasionally there have been moments, right, over the years where you'll talk to a coach. Maybe it is in July, right after they get a job, or you talk to them in the middle of a season, and it won't be for the matter of the record, but they might just be like, and I've had this happen. Just they'll be like, man, like, you know, I'm having issues at home, or just like, yeah, like, you know, wife's fed up with me, etc. Like, the point of the story is they're like the life of a coach, and particularly after you change jobs, just because you get paid a ton of money doesn't mean that you don't encounter some really significant challenges, and in many ways stresses that everyday people don't encounter. I assume you've heard, you know, anecdotes like this.
Oh yeah, like my main thought from the story was that this is Frank's story, but it's not a story unique to Frank. Like,
correct.
We could find 50 coaches who would have this a very similar story.
But the point that Frank is making is this is a bit taboo, and coaches shouldn't be afraid to talk on the record about it. Very few coaches would have done what Frank did here.
Because what happens is, and we should just state this matter-of-factly, and then we can talk about it within the context. Because the issue becomes nobody wants to hear a guy who just signed a $10 million contract complaining about anything. Like, the overwhelming majority of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Too many Americans are struggling below the poverty line. So when you hear some multimillionaire coach say, boy, I tell you what, my life really is difficult, nobody wants to hear it. That said, and I've stressed this for years, just because somebody has money doesn't mean they don't have problems, doesn't mean they don't have struggles. Like, you don't have to worry about paying your gas bill, your light bill, and your mortgage. And that's an awesome thing to have off the table. Like, I can remember being a young adult and not having money and really having to live paycheck to paycheck. Like, I know, you know, I wasn't born into money. I'm the first college graduate in my family. My parents worked hard, and I was a very, I lived a comfortable life. But when I got out on my own, you know, it wasn't easy at first. So I know what that's like. And I know how I would have thought if I would have heard some guy who's made $30 million complaining about how tough his life is. I'm like, yo, man, you ever sat at a restaurant and called 1-800-REGIONS to check your balance to see if you have enough money in your checking account to order, you know, an appetizer at Applebee's? Because like that's I can remember doing that when I was an adult, in my early 20s. So that's why it's taboo, is because coaches know what the immediate response will be. But just because you have money doesn't mean your day-to-day problems don't still exist. And for coaches, where that really can become problematic, first off, these guys work long hours, they travel a lot. Their spouses and their children often pay a price for their careers. Now, the other side of it is an incredible home and private schools and all sorts of advantages. But, you know, coaches' kids don't see their fathers as much as probably a lot of other kids see their fathers, and same goes for spouses. And yes, I have had a million coaches talk about the exact same things Frank was talking about. I can remember, and I don't think this person would mind me telling this story, exactly the same thing you're talking about, being on the road, summer circuit, right after Brad Underwood had taken the Illinois job. And same thing, bump into him. Hey, Brad, what's up? How you doing? And it was just like, not great. You know, this is hard. You know, I'm living in a hotel. I put on 20 pounds. I'm working, nonstop every day, and my family's still not with me. And like, he was really stressed about all of that. Amazing to have that job and that contract. But this was a guy, he was like, I'm living in a hotel, working every day, not seeing my family, and gaining weight. Things aren't great. How are you, GP? It was one of those types of deals.
And you're like, I'm awesome, buddy.
Yeah. But like, when coaches make I think sometimes you think, well, this guy coached here and now he coaches there and he's got a lot of money and it must be awesome. And it is. Any of these guys could retire if it wasn't awesome. All right. But sometimes you got to pay a real price to change jobs, in this profession. I know coaches who, and where it really becomes difficult is I've had coaches tell me they didn't take jobs strictly because their kid was about to do a senior year of school.
That happens regularly. Yes.
I've had a coach tell me I would have taken that job, but I could not bring myself to make my daughter change high schools before her senior year. And I didn't want to leave my family behind so that my daughter could finish her senior year. So I'm just keeping this job because of my daughter's age or my son's age. I've had multiple coaches tell me that. I know a coach who took a job one time just before his daughter was going to be a senior in high school, and he actually left. Because you got to think about the timing of this. These men always take these jobs in March or April, right? With few exceptions. It's March or April. Like you're finishing up the school year. So literally every time a coach changes jobs, his family stays behind at least for the initial months. Maybe not literally every time, but way more often than not, nearly every time, because you got to finish whatever year of school you're in. And then they make the move. But I had a coach tell me like he was in his first season. It's like January of his first season at his new job. And I'm like, so you guys get settled in, got a new house? He's like, no, I'm living in a hotel. My family's still back at my old spot because my daughter didn't want to change high schools. So,
yes,
so my whole family's living where I used to work. And now I'm living here where I work. And, I don't care how much money you got. That's not easy. And that's not fun. And I was pleased to see Frank talk about it so candidly and openly. And best I can tell, before we started this podcast, there were some other coaches on Twitter who could appreciate him talking about it because they know exactly what he's going through.
One coach texted me this morning. Let me read you what he said. He said, I'm sitting here nodding with every single quote that Frank Martin has in your story. Did wind up, of course, hearing from a few coaches. The point is that it's not unique, as you said. This is not for every family, but with plenty of coaching families across college sports, probably frankly across pro sports. The exact thing you just mentioned. There's a lot of stuff that didn't make the story, but Frank had a staffer last season at South Carolina. He's now at Clemson. He's at Clemson. His family's still in Columbia. He's living away from his family right now, and that's a major thing. Like you and I, we're not doing that. I wouldn't handle that well. You tell me that I got to live away from my wife and kids for the majority of a year? No shot. Not doing that. And because of the nature of the job, it calls for that. And so Frank and his wife, Anya, were amazing to talk to. His daughter, Amalia, was awesome to talk to. And this was, as I write in the piece, like it did feel like it was almost like another level of therapy for them to talk through this, because it has not been easy. Like I needed to be very tender with the story, to be pun unintended, to be frank. There were even a couple of quotes and anecdotes there that I actually thought were so revealing. I was uncomfortable including them in the story, given that they include, children. So I did not. But Frank and Anya were just amazing in wanting to do this. Anya said there's going to be a lot of coaches' wives who read this stuff, and they're going to identify. She mentioned, I'm not going to name the coaches, but she mentioned two coaches who I would consider among the 30 to 35 most recognizable names in the country. And she's had many conversations with them over the years about just how difficult this stuff can be. And they just don't think it should be something that people should shy away from talking about, only because it's probably good to talk about it and the mental health impacts on it as well. And, I get what you're saying when it comes to a coach and you're well off making millions of dollars. But as Frank even says, like, that money isn't helping my daughter overcome this. Like we have real issues. And I mean, you can go ahead here. I'm continuing my thought, but like it was compounded by the fact that in the final 2 years at South Carolina, like the environment there, and you've talked about this previously with Turgeon, it got real bad. Like Anya said, Frank does not complain at home. If he's complaining, something is extremely wrong. He just does not vent about work. And at a point she knew, like, This was an irreversible decision.
Yeah, I want to be clear because sometimes like what I was doing with this Frank Martin story is saying the reason coaches don't want to talk about the struggles they're having in their lives while making these moves is because the reaction from some people is, shut up, you've got all this money. What are you complaining about? I want to be clear. That's not the reaction from me. I'm just telling you that is what the reaction would be from some. Sometimes, and this happened on a recent episode, I'm trying to provide an alternative perspective. Like, well, here's what this person is probably thinking. Here's how these people would probably react. And then I look on Twitter and it's like, Gary Parrish said this. And I'm like, Gary Parrish did not say that. I was explaining to you with nuance and context, a different side of this thing. So when I go through that whole spiel about, does Frank Martin remember what it was like to struggle to pay? I'm saying that's what some people would say. It's not what I say. I was explaining how I understand how just because you have money doesn't mean you don't have issues with your children or issues with your wife. Having money takes some real life stress off of your life, but it doesn't eliminate all stress. And I think Frank's story and a lot of coaches' stories would demonstrate that. The other place where this gets complicated is when coaches, they have a family, they're working a job, they're in a city, they divorce.
Yes.
And then they get offered a new job. And then they have to make a decision. Do I leave to take this job? In a vacuum, I should, and I would, but it's going to mean I'm moving across the country from my children. Can I convince my ex-wife to move with us? Like those things happen too, where the ex-wife will move with her ex-husband, not together, but to the same city, so that this child doesn't have to be raised, in a place where the father isn't living. And but the other thing is sometimes coaches do have to make that decision. It's an incredible opportunity for a lot of money, but it will require me to, or more accurately, it'll require my son or daughter or both, in some cases, to grow up without me as a daily presence in their lives. How do you balance those things? I'm fortunate I've never had to make a decision like that, but that type of decision would terrify me.
And in talking about this, and Anya, who went to UMass, and I don't want to give up the whole story. We'll link it in the podcast description here, but it's even more intriguing in that Frank Martin got asked. He told me by at least 4 schools that he said no to. I don't know what schools. I didn't ask him what schools. I don't need to know schools. That's irrelevant. But the 5th school was UMass, and this is this past March when he got fired. Schools even reaching out in advance of that because they saw the writing on the wall. And Frank actually, I don't know if he had said this publicly. I think he had not revealed it publicly before, but he, we knew this was the case, but I think he kind of spoke on it on the record for the first time. Like there were significant efforts to try and actually, have a coup and get him out in 21, but he saved it for 1 more year. And part of why he saved it was, one, he wanted to keep doing the job there, obviously, but he didn't want to pull his kids out of he didn't want to have to leave at that point in their lives there. But Anya was a track athlete at UMass in the 1990s. So she went to school in this area, but as she explained, and she was, when we did the interview, she was she was crying many times throughout it. And she said they were good cries, but it was an emotional experience for her to go through this. And I want to say publicly, like, I so appreciate her willingness to talk about this. And she sent me a wonderful text message this morning that just reiterated actually how helpful it is for her to speak on this again and have this story out there. She actually thinks it's helping in their healing process, in their transition process. But when she went to school at UMass, like, people think, oh, you went to UMass, that's awesome, like, you guys are coming home. She's like, I was from, like, New York. I went home on every weekend. If I wasn't competing, like, I went to school, I was on the team, but otherwise, like, I didn't have some, like, amazing, like, it was fine. I enjoyed my time here, but it wasn't, like, the most incredible thing ever. And so for her, and the piece references this, like, you would think, like, Frank would be like, all right, let's do this. As long as you guys are good with it, let's do it. She would not tell him if she was in favor or against the job until Frank decided independently if he was for or against it. Imagine that. Like, you're going through this. She would not tell him She would not tell him until he came to the decision, I want the job, but I will only take it if you're going to say yes. She was, of course, on board with it. But as the piece details, like they had multiple sit downs with their family because, his daughter's a senior now. I had to move as a senior in high school. Terrible experience. Terrible. And there were teachers at his daughter's school that after he took the job, they said, man, is your dad really going to make you move? Like he's going to be that terrible of a person. He's going to make you move your senior. So Amalia changed her mind. She's like, I don't want this. I'm not moving. And it was a huge thing. And he's 1,000 miles away trying to do the job. So the point is, this kind of stuff is what coaches will talk about. They're like, when they talk like behind the scenes with each other, with their agents, this is as much dominates the conversation as any other part of it. So appreciate us talking a good 15 minutes here. Because it is very, very real and it is so seldom discussed, but it is the reality of what a lot of families go through. And moving is a major trauma. If you're not yet of college age, like it is a major life trauma. No, as I say in the piece, it's not a life-threatening illness, and there are many other bigger problems, but it can create instability and major stress. And so the point is, UMass is off to a nice start. 9-3. They haven't been this good since the last time they made the tournament, and they've only made the tournament once, and that was back a decade ago, and they've only made it once in 25 years, right? But it does come at a certain level of cost, and they're getting there. Like it's getting better, but it's still not all the way there. And there's no telling if Martin's going to be the guy. Like I think he might actually do a pretty good job at UMass, but there's no guarantee. So my thanks to him. Very few coaches would be as willing to be as transparent on the record as Frank Martin, particularly with the story. There's a couple quotes in there where, man, he's just like, I walk in my house, I'm on eggshells. I can feel the tension. He's basically laying out like, I walk in and I can just feel it in the first 10 seconds I walk in the house. I was like, this is not, they've had a terrible day. Something's wrong with my son or my wife or my daughter or all of them. Maybe they might all be fighting, and now I got to handle it. I can't just say I've had a tough day at work. I don't want to deal with it. I have to do this. I made this choice. It's almost like they allowed him to do it, but after that, he takes it all on himself. And it all ties back to the story starts out with him being at a dealership in 1988 because he had a father who left him when he was 10 years old. I'm not going to give away the whole opening, but it's an unreal scene. And basically the way that he was treated by his father affected Frank in how he was going to live his life and be a father, be a family member for the rest of his life. And so like that scene in 1988 kind of sets the tone for the next 30 years of his life, and it really brings us to the situation he found us himself in today. So we'll put it in the podcast description. I've gotten a few nice notes from folks. I appreciate that, but it's not me. This is completely Frank Martin's story, and if he's not willing to tell it and go on the record with it, then whatever. I'm just the vessel for it, and I appreciate him and him being willing to share that, because it is not uncommon. But that's the exact point: is that people should be more aware of the fact that there are very significant stresses and struggles that children that are born into this, that have no say over it, right? And coaches' wives and spouses and all that stuff. It's pretty interesting. So just think about that the next time you catch UMass playing basketball, and any coach that's in a new spot. Many of them are probably going through a tougher time than you might realize.
Before we get out of here, like I noted, we are in a week before the Christmas holiday where there's only one game on the entire schedule between two ranked teams in the AP poll, and that was last night, Virginia at Miami. There are a couple of games over the next couple of days that are interesting to various degrees. Tonight, Wednesday night, St. John's at Villanova, and then Thursday night, Illinois against Missouri in St. Louis. Thoughts on either one of those?
Well, I will also mention Michigan, North Carolina, 7 Eastern. Nada, you'll be there. Jordan Brand Classic. Real quick, Nada, turn on your mic. You were at Florida, Oklahoma. Now you'll get Wolverines, Tar Heels. How is, good event? Tonight will be super well attended. I know they had women's games last night and tonight. This is the first time they've done it. A quick impression of it, my man?
Easily one of the best experiences in terms of an MTE that I can think of. And quite honestly, the court's done well. Charlotte Sports Foundation has put on a great event for this Jumpman Invitational. There was a media shoot around earlier today. Might have made a college 3 on the Spectrum Center floor. Okay. So outside of that, it's been a great event, and I'm expecting a borderline home game for the North Carolina Tar Heels tonight. So outside of that, I'm looking forward to it because it's been a great event, and I hope we can I get to see more of these because it's kind of awesome.
North Carolina opens its locker room after its games, win or lose. Nada, if the moment is good for it, go introduce yourself to Leaky. Tell him we say hi. He is the absolute goods here, man. It is a complete coincidence that he wound up being an every show episode mentioned kind of guy. By not you heard the episode in the preseason, but the interactions I've had with him over the decades, over the past few months, he's the goods. So he should be tremendous. Keep an eye on that. Obviously both those teams, Michigan's 7-3, North Carolina's 8-4. To GP's point, not the rank matchup. It's a high profile.
Well, how about this? This is what when people say rankings don't matter. You know why? Among the many reasons rankings do matter, that game wasn't even on my radar.
Yep. Yeah. No, exactly. I hear you. Without a doubt. So that'll be one to watch because the loser of it's going to be in tricky resume spot there. St. John's at Nova Wednesday night 6:30. There's plenty of intrigue with the game just in terms of Nova 6-5. This is like if you're going to dig yourself out of the hole, you got to beat St. John's at home. For the Johnnies, 11-1. Like beating Nova on the road isn't going to necessarily like validate you that much more, but it's going to get you on the path to getting ranked and building an NCAA tournament resident. They did not have a good non-con schedule. I'll also note on Wednesday night, Auburn plays at Washington. That's just a random non-conference game. I don't totally understand. Bruce Pearl, more power to you, scheduled at USC on Sunday, and then they're at Washington tonight. Could benefit them to try and steal one on the road. I don't know if they'll be able to do that. But Mizzou, Illinois is the game I'm interested most in, GP. 9 o'clock, bragging rights game, always in St. Louis on that neutral court there. Mizzou, 10-1, was just rolled by Kansas 11 nights ago. And then Illinois, I don't have the quotes up in front of me. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But they beat Alabama A&M by like 21. But afterward, Matthew Meyer and some other guys were basically saying it was a continuation of the viral Brad Underwood press conference clip that we ran a few episodes ago, where they were just saying like, we're not on the same page. There's a ton of work to do. And particularly coming off a win, there was a real sense of urgency. So I'm interested to see Illinois' body language in this game on Thursday night and how strong they come out against a Missouri team that's going to have, even though they've got a gaudy record, again, terrible non-conference schedule, but that's to be expected. First year under Dennis Gates. No shame whatsoever in scheduling that in your first season as a high major coach. But if Missouri is going to build itself a nice resume, like this is your second to last non-conference game, like peel it off if you can. So that's the one to me by far that I've got the most interest in.
Yeah. Villanova is just 6-5, but 4-0 with Cam Whitmore, available. He is the 5-star freshman. I got to see him in person on Saturday at St. Joe's, and boy, he's put together. I don't get to go to as many games as I used to go to because of my television responsibilities. At this point, I really only go to games if I'm doing sideline reporting on them. Very few outside of that. But I've worked a Houston game this season, and I've worked a Villanova game this season, which has given me an opportunity to see two likely one and done lottery picks in Cam Whitmore and Jarris Walker. And I will tell you, you don't have to know anything about basketball to just walk in the gym and go, those guys look different than everybody else. They just look different than everybody else. And he has been a real different. Cam wasn't great against St. Joe's, but he has been really good, broadly speaking, since he returned from off-season thumb surgery. He had thumb surgery, and it forced him to miss the first 7 games of the season. But since he's been available, Villanova has not lost. So that's going to be an interesting game. And then with Missouri, it's year one of Dennis Gates. Everything that's a positive is gravy. 10-1 is, I don't care what the schedule is. If you take over a program and basically remake the roster overnight via the transfer portal, if you win 10 of your first 11, you're going to feel pretty good about that. But, they haven't really played anybody other than Kansas, and they got blasted by Kansas. So this is an opportunity to prove that maybe there's some substance there, that this team can be a legitimate contender for the NCAA tournament. Because if you get blasted again, then it becomes pretty simple for people to say, hey, 10-2 is nice, but every time you play a real team, you get absolutely hammered. So we're not going to expect much from you in the SEC. So that's among the reasons that's interesting to me. Let's see if Missouri can play competitively with Illinois, maybe beat Illinois. If so, then that makes it pretty interesting going into the SEC. If they get hammered again, then you can start to not ignore, but just until they show otherwise, just assume that they're not quite ready to beat that caliber of an opponent or even compete.
Okay, so we got a couple of interesting games next couple of nights. Figure we'll have a Friday episode, Festivus, Christmas Eve Friday. I think 11 a.m. as usual is our target there. But so maybe we open with a couple of thoughts if they're relevant there. But I think the plan. Listen, I Christmas mailbag. All right, let's bring the goods here. We have plenty. I can't wait to ask you some of these questions, GP. And by the way, I think we got a couple, but Nada, you want a couple more, right? Shouts to cbs@gmail.com. Okay. If one or two of you got 10 seconds, hey guys, this is so-and-so from so-and-so. Here's my question. In and out. We'll get a couple more video submissions to mix in with some written ones. A little Christmas stuff under the tree in advance, and then you can listen to it on Festivus, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, whenever you want. But there's no games on Friday. We normally pick games. There's no games this weekend. We've got the Diamond Head Classic, but whatever. GP is going to be on cloud 9 for the next 72 hours minimum because you got Correa. How about waking up to that, my man?
I did wake up to it.
How about? I know it broke at like 2:40 in the morning East Coast time.
Yeah, I was dead asleep. I didn't even make it all the way through Grizzlies Nuggets last night, and I woke up and I actually had a text message from a friend that was like, "Whoa!" And then I was like, "What?" And then I was like, "Is this real? Like, is this?
Wild, right?
How did this?" Because for people who don't know, he had agreed to a 13-year, $300+ million contract with the San Francisco Giants. Apparently, failed his physical. But the Mets don't seem to care, which scares me.
I don't even know if you care right now. It's just
it scares me so badly because there's two professional teams that I care about in this whole world. Only two: the New York Mets and the Memphis Grizzlies. One because I was a childhood fan, and the other because it's my hometown. And it feels like it could be Chandler Parsons all over again.
That's a good point.
Like the reason the Grizzlies were able to sign Chandler Parsons to a $90 million contract via free agency is because nobody else would offer the money. Like the initial reporting was Portland was in there, but my understanding is Portland was like, man, there's some problems here. And the Grizzlies were like, we'll sign you. We don't need to go through an extensive physical the way the Blazers want to. And I believe Chandler was advised like, hey, listen, there's $90 million on the table from Memphis right now. I think Chandler actually told this story in a podcast. His agent was like, there's $90 million on the table from Memphis right now. They're not asking any more questions about anything. All you have to do is sign it. Or, because his preferred destination was Damian Lillard, Portland. Or you can go to Portland and go through this physical, but they might red flag you. And if they red flag you, then you've got problems. So what do you want to do? And Chandler was like, grit and grind. Let's go. and that was a disastrous contract. So I hope this isn't a repeat of that. But it is nice to have an owner who does not care about spending money. That part's fun.
Early Christmas present for GP. I believe we got Christmas. If you're watching on YouTube and if you have not smashed the like button, come on already. We're wrapping up here, but I believe we got some nice Christmas tunes fading out if you're listening traditionally on the way on the phone. Thank you again. We will talk again 2 days from now. We'll see how the next couple of days go. And then, if you got questions. Also, I should mention, I think we'll try and take a couple live ones on the show. Chat today was great. I do enjoy occasionally peeking in and seeing dialogue between the viewers here. So that's wonderful. And we'll talk to you on Friday.
Shouts to Devin Downey. Shouts to Chester, South Carolina. Shouts to Larnell. Shouts to Huck. Thank you guys once again for listening on College Basketball Podcast. If you're not subscribed, please go subscribe anywhere you subscribe to podcasts, including Apple and Spotify. While you're there, leave a nice comment, 5 stars and some words. There's more of us than there are of them. If you haven't smashed the like button yet, please do that. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel, I don't know.
That's your Christmas present to us.
Am I allowed to flip a double bird? Tell me if I can.
No.
Tell me if I can.
No.
Tell me if I can.
Please don't. Please.
If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel yet, double pinky to you. You know what that means. Look at my little bitty pinkies. I got some.
Dude, your left pinky looks like half the size of the other one. What are we doing here? Look at that.
My pinkies.
Okay, that's better.
My pinkies are the same size.
Here we go.
My buddy Jeff Calkins disclosed to me in recent weeks that his feet are different sizes. Like one foot's an 11 and the other's like a 9.5.
That's problematic.
Yeah. I was just like, what is wrong? What?
Yeah.
Dude.
No good.
And then I got other people whose big toes are shorter than their other toes. Like
yeah, that's normal. I'm looking right now. Yeah, I think that's standard. My second toe is longer than my big toe. I think that's SOP, standard operating procedure.
Not me, baby.
No stubby toes?
Yeah, my big toes are my.
Well, yeah, girth wise, yes, but
no,
length.
My big toes. My big toe sticks out further than all my other toes. Here, I got little feet and little hands, but boy, everything matches up exactly the way it's supposed to. You know, look at that. Look at that right there.
Tiny fingers, my man. All right, let's get out of here.
We'll talk to you again on Friday. Bye-bye.